having the resources for remote learning, not having the Wi-Fi hotspot, the technology that's necessary, maybe not having the space at home to be able to have schooling, as well as the supplies that might be necessary. For so many of our young people in poor communities, food scarcity was real. It really is real when you have your entire family home during quarantine and not being able to have the food supply that's necessary. And then for so many of our young people, not having the support system, not being able to have your after school or your community. And you're depending on that not only for programming, but for the interaction, love, and support. And if you're not getting it at home, and you're now not getting it in the community, where does that leave our young people? Now we have our silent victims of mass incarceration. There's 2.7 million children in the United States that have an imprisoned parent. And to put that in perspective, that's 1 in 106 white children that have an incarcerated parent, 1 in 106. 1 in 37 Hispanic children have an incarcerated parent, and it's 1 in 9 for African Americans. So this is disproportionately affecting our communities. And for children of imprisoned parents, you're dealing with the shame, the stigma, and for so many of our young people, the secret. Because when you lose a parent, let's say for divorce, military deployment, or even death, society has a level of sympathy. But when you lose a parent due to incarceration, that empathy doesn't quite exist for our young people. Again, what are they doing with this? No one's addressing this. Now we have the silent victims of police brutality. Our young people have the vicarious trauma of seeing police brutality repeatedly, either impacted personally or seeing it in your community, and not being able to have anywhere to express that trauma. For so many of our young people, they need an outlet. They need to be able to share their feelings, and how do they express that? And that's what motivated me to start an organization 10 years ago, Children of Promise NYC. I decided to dedicate myself, my time, my commitment, my passion to the development of young people. Children of Promise NYC, as we approach our 10 years of providing services within the community, not only in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, we're opening our second location in the South Bronx, serving 300 young people in Brooklyn, 300 young people in Bed-Stuy, 300 young people in Brooklyn, it's in the South Bronx. And these are two communities that have been disproportionately impacted by mass incarceration. So we developed an organization that allows our young people to have a voice, an organization that is specifically designed for children of imprisoned parents. So we have been able to now not only have an organization that provides academic and recreation engagement, therapeutic services, as well as self-advocacy. So our young people could learn to have a voice, not only for themselves, for their families, and for their community.
You know, Sharon, you talked about kind of this framework that's been broken down in terms of the kinds of support systems that youngsters need. I know that a lot of the children that you speak of really rely on your organization. How have you guys been able to function with COVID, and how are you able to keep in touch with them and make sure that they're getting what they need?
Our organization had to pivot very quickly. COVID hit on March 16th, whereas the mayor of New York City closed schools. We had a meeting the next morning, Monday morning, March 17th, and we totally pivoted on how we provided services. Not only have we become a full feeding program, we feed dinner, grab-and-go dinners to our young people and our families every day since March 17th. Not only we provide virtual after school so that our young people can remain that connection, not only with our direct service counselors, but also with our mental health clinicians. They've been able to keep their caseload, but providing services virtually. We've been able to not only deliver some of our meals for whenever COVID-19 has impacted our families, not only because of illness and death, we deliver meals to our families. So we had to pivot very quickly. We created an initiative called CPNYC Cares that specifically was as a result of COVID-19 and being able to meet the needs of our families.
Great. Shaun, I'm curious, Shaun, what are your thoughts on the lack of media coverage that we're seeing right now in terms of the impact of COVID on the Black and Brown community?
Well, that's a loaded question in a lot of ways, because so few of our issues get the coverage they deserve. And, you know, for those of us who live in New York and call it home, the devastation that we've seen in our neighborhoods. I have friends that have just in a few blocks have lost hundreds of people. And these are mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, grandparents, aunts, uncles, essential workers. You know, I've had to explain to people that just in Brooklyn alone, Brooklyn has had more deaths to the coronavirus than all but one state, more deaths than 49 states just in Brooklyn. And that devastation and that impact on our communities, on our people, you wouldn't know that if you looked at CNN or MSNBC. You know, you have to dig to really understand the devastation. And part of what I'm seeing now in Brooklyn today, in Manhattan today, and all over the country is now that we are also facing a crisis of white supremacist violence when we think of Ahmaud Arbery, police brutality when we think of cases like Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. Those of us in New York know that New York has a painful history of police violence. But what you're seeing is people who are stung from the police brutality, stung from the white supremacy, are also those who are seriously impacted not only by the physical and health impacts of the coronavirus, but also are impacted by the job loss. And so there's just there's a perfect storm of despair.
Yeah.
And as I see people now doing things that people in despair do, you can hardly even understand it without understanding the impact of the coronavirus on our communities. And, you know, what we see regularly is that our stories are often treated with a kind of flat, one-dimensional description, particularly in mainstream media. And so in some ways, we have to take it upon ourselves to tell our own stories so that people understand our successes and our failures, our highs and our lows. They have to understand the richness in our community and the pain in our community, because what we see is that those stories just aren't being told the way they should in most mainstream media outlets. And when I see people now, you know, protesting, or even I see destruction of property and all, like, there's a real sense of despair and frustration in our communities. And you can tie all of that right back to just how hard the coronavirus and all the downstream things that have come as a result of it have hit our communities. And even to close out, when we talk about mass incarceration, it has hit America's jails and prisons in a way that is so severe. And when we say that 1 in 9 Black children have an incarcerated parent or family member, those families who I interface with every day are so afraid, not only of all the everyday challenges and struggles of being incarcerated, but now they see the coronavirus sweeping across jails and prisons all over the country. So there's a real tension and pain and frustration in our communities right now. And so it's easy for mainstream media to show a video of some type of destruction of property without fully understanding just the level of despair going on right now.
Nice.
You're right, you know, and as somebody who's in the media, I think that that's, and a Black man in the media, I think that it's something that I really struggle with. It's a fight at the table to get these stories told.
Right.
Specifically the kinds of systematic racism and inequities that you speak of, right? The things that we have known about and as a society we have come to accept have been put on blast on some level. And it was interesting when we started to finally have the conversation that the Black community was being hit the hardest by this. A few people came to me and asked, is this true? I don't, you know, is it being made up? Is it this? Is it that? And I thought it was fascinating because in every major category, right? Whether it's access to healthcare, education, housing, the kinds of jobs that allow people to work from home, and of course, the criminal justice system. Black folks are on the losing side of that. Are you optimistic at all? What do you think will come out of this moment? Do you think that any kind of awareness is being happened, or it's too early to say? We're just reactionary right now.
Well, here's the thing, and it's a great question. We don't lack awareness. Like, like we understand our problems in vivid detail. And often, if we think of even where the country is today with the fallout from the murder of in Minneapolis, when we think of that, the country now, after an accumulative effect of police violence, after an accumulative effect of 3 months of a fallout from the coronavirus, now the country is starting to see the despair. I typically would be very optimistic, but I have started to feel like the things that this country could do in response to the coronavirus, like this would be a great time. The United States is really the only developed country in the world that doesn't have universal health care. This would have been a great time for our country to pivot to universal health care. Every developed country in the world has it. This would have been a great time. Almost every developed country in the world has free college tuition all around the world. This would have been an essential time for our country to say, listen, every high school graduate can enter into this next phase with no student loan debt. But all these different systemic shifts our country could be making, we're no closer to making those shifts than we were 3 months ago or 6 months ago. And we've seen other nations make serious shifts in ways that have. Canada, right above us, has provided every resident almost $2,000 a month of income for the past 4 months. And that income has supported so many people. Even college students got that income in Canada to get them through this. And so what we're seeing is in the United States, this is what happens when people in leadership, and it's so easy to blame all of this on the president, but this is what we see nationally from a leadership failure, even when governors don't respond with systemic change, when mayors don't respond with deep systemic change. And so I wish that this moment had been met properly by our elected officials with real hardcore shifts and change. That's just not what we've seen. And it doesn't mean we won't see it or we'll never see it, but I don't even think we have our mind fully wrapped around the fallout of these past few months, because we're still in some ways, we're still right in the middle of the storm. And, people are still unemployed, and what you've said and what we've said is true. It's whatever impacts the United States impacts Black students, Black families, sometimes exponentially more than anybody else. And so we have to just continue figuring out how to fight for the solutions that make the most sense.
I feel like part of the Black experience is educating and forgiving, educating and forgiving.
Right.
Educating and forgiving.
Yeah, that's a painful cycle.
It is. It is. It's a form of violence in itself, right? It is. It's triggering all these different things. And so, one last question, kind of on this point, is like I know that you have your podcast, you have your platforms, you are writing. When we're having these conversations, if our community already knows these things, or in so many cases, the people in our community aren't in positions of power to change them, who are you speaking to? Who are you directing these conversations and posing these questions to?
Well, there are opportunities for us to be in power. And I see something in Minnesota that gives me a great illustration. Just yesterday, the governor of Minnesota, in response to the murder of George Floyd, removed the district attorney in that case, Mike Freeman, and replaced the district attorney with the Attorney General, Keith Ellison. Keith Ellison is a man that I know, and I've known Keith personally for years. I campaigned with him at events across the country. He has deep roots in the community. And all of a sudden, instead of having basically a stranger run this case, the community has a person that they know and trust running the case. That's an example of what happens. Now, sometimes we just say vote. Vote's not enough. We have to be specific. Vote for who? Why do we vote for them? Why should we fight for this person? Like sometimes our solutions, our political solutions are way too simple. I run an organization that's helped elect district attorneys all over the country, from San Francisco to Boston to St. Louis City and St. Louis County, Jackson, Mississippi, San Antonio. And in all of those cities, we now have people running the local justice system that we know and trust. Now, we still hold them accountable, but it's an example of us having a path to power. We're not powerless. There are times where it feels that way, but we also have to have people in power in the right positions. It's not enough just for us to have a seat on the city council. We have to be the decision maker. Another example, you may have seen a horrible video of a Morehouse and Spelman student being brutally assaulted by police 2 nights ago in Atlanta. But because Atlanta has a mayor that loves the community and loves Morehouse and Spelman and loves those students, she literally fired those 2 police officers within hours of understanding the situation. That's another example of what happens when you elect somebody in a position. It should have never happened. It's awful that it did. But because there was someone in power that said, no, not on my watch. This doesn't need an investigation. You're fired today. Get your stuff and go. So there's an example of when we use our power to elect people who actually love us and care for us, who love our children, who love our families, and will fight for them. We've also seen, and I don't have to name their names, but we've seen people that we elected to fight for us who have all but abandoned us over the past 3 or 4 days. And so this crisis can kind of help you know who's who. And the painful lesson is we have to elect people to these offices, not who promise us for the first time that they'll fight for us, but we have to elect people to office who've been fighting for us, who've been caring for us, who've been caring for our children and families. And for whatever position it is, if it's a school board position, a city council, or mayor, or governor, or attorney general, like I said in Minnesota. But we see the difference. In Minneapolis, there was a DA that didn't really care about the concerns of the people versus an attorney general who does. And the juxtaposition of those two is huge. And so we have to just continue to figure out, how do we leverage our influence to get the right people to represent us wherever we can?
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Baz, children, certainly in America, are the collateral damage of incarceration. I'm curious how the countries that are featured in your book have tried to address some of those issues.
Well, it depends. It varies quite a bit from country to country. So, first of all, I just want to thank you guys for having me, and also just acknowledge how difficult it is to have these conversations in the here and now, coming off the weekend that we've had, and in a moment where it especially feels like, to some degree, talk feels very cheap, but we know it isn't. So this is a crisis that has hit the globe, and it's hit the globe in prisons. And it's been actually one of the rare moments where the US is paying attention to the world. We're usually so busy looking at ourselves that we can't think about other systems and structures beyond our own. And this is especially the case in terms of the prison system. So all over the world, we've seen, in an unprecedented fashion, mass releases of people from prison, up into the hundreds of thousands. And this is because the crisis has hit the prisons insanely hard everywhere. Here in the US, there are at least, it's really hard to estimate, and we know that things are iffy with testing, but at least about 35,000 cases, almost 500 deaths, and that's rising daily. And that's only of incarcerated people. We're not even talking about staff and officers and other issues of that sort. And it's that rare moment too, where we're acknowledging that sort of, we have to acknowledge that them is us, because prisons, much as we would imagine them to be, or they have been constructed to be these kind of almost leper colonies. They're over there, they don't matter, they don't touch us. We realize that they are porous institutions, and you cannot have an epidemic over there that doesn't impact over here. So it's a sort of perfect storm. And so what you've seen around the world is that folks are releasing people from some countries in much larger numbers than we're releasing people here in the US. But it tends to stop at that. And that, I think, is where this crisis, we have to pause and be big picture thinkers, even as we're rushing to plug up holes and put Band-Aids on. Because if we just release people, and we're not releasing enough people by any means. Here in New York, Cuomo hasn't even exercised clemency in terms of releasing people who've served 20 years, 30 years, elderly prisoners. There's so many people that need to be released that are not being released. But even if we did focus on releases and do well in that department, which we're not, which other countries, so many other countries, even Turkey and Iran, have us beat in, we have to give people support once they're home. You can't just release. It was hard enough. Re-entry is one of the most ridiculous words because it makes it sound so simple. Like you just leave and then come back and re-enter. It's an uphill battle every step of the way. It's an obstacle course. And so we need to be releasing people. We need to be ramping up our systems of support for people when they are released. And then we need to radically undo the vile system that we've created, and really think about what community justice looks like, and really think what scaling up restorative justice looks like, and how we move away from this, punitive system that isn't making us safer, that is designed and targeted at people of color, things that we already know. So, and I just can say that among my prison to college pipeline students, I mean, I'm in touch with folks on the inside and students on the inside regularly. And of course, it's a nightmare there. The chaos and the fear is real. It varies so dramatically from facility to facility too, in terms of what's available to people, whether there are masks, whether there are hand sanitizers, whether there's access to phone calls. I mean, talking about the children and the families, you cut people off visits, you cut people off programs and education that are lifelines to them, that are critical to their identities, to their sanity, to their being able to function. And then you introduce the virus into this mess. Now you introduce this crisis of, immediate violence and threat to their families' lives at every turn. That's itself an absolute nightmare. But then looking at the other end, at the people who've come home, they're facing crisis too. Lack of housing, homeless shelters. I noticed that poll that was presented earlier about which system is affected by racism. The greatest number of people checked mass incarceration. Well, those are all intersectional. That's the cocktail of racism. Healthcare, education, mass incarceration. They can't be separated from each other. So so folks are coming home from prison. They're going into homeless shelters and NYCHA, which are also hotbeds of the virus and lack of services. There's across the board discrimination in terms of employment, hiring practices. I had a student, a very dear student of mine, who had been out of work. He applied for jobs with Uber Eats and Instacart a couple weeks ago. In the thick of the pandemic, they had the nerve to reject him because of his background. Think about that. Essential workers in the heart of a pandemic. I have another student who's on the front lines working in a hospital, and he chose to do that. Actually, a number of directly impacted folks are now getting jobs on the front lines, had already been working jobs on the front lines, but particularly in the healthcare sector, because they won't be discriminated against there. Well, this student took a job, has been working in a children's hospital, and what happened is his coworkers found out he's formerly incarcerated, and now there's all these people talking about him, making comments about him. I mean, this has already been going on, but what we're seeing is it's on steroids as a result of the virus, and now again as a result of this same old return to the newest display of white supremacy.
I'm fascinated by people's ability to compartmentalize, right? To operate from the mindset of, hey, it's not me, it's not an issue that I need to worry about. And so that lens, I'm curious how you do your work. Is it hard work? Like, how do you get people to be more empathetic about the experiences of others and to get them to understand that we have a shared destiny in this, right? Like, we cannot have freedom under the, under this current system. How do you reach people?
Well, for one, I'm white, if anyone hasn't noticed. And therefore, I think I can get away with saying a lot of things in certain settings, and I take advantage of that. And I think and I recognize my privilege to do that every step of the way. This has never been an intellectual exercise for me. No, I'm not Black or Latino. No, I wasn't incarcerated, nor did I have family members who were incarcerated. I am a native New Yorker who grew up in the hip hop generation in the era as mass incarceration was ramping up. It was impossible not to see it. But I came to this work because it deeply spoke to me, and have been doing it for 15 years. But I think the most important thing is, number one, you have to know when to sit down and shut up, and to use your privilege as a platform for others. And I think that initially, I started the Prison to College pipeline a decade ago. It was almost impossible to get funding then for it because no one wanted to talk about this issue. And by no one, that means funders, people in positions of power and holding the purse strings. It wasn't it was too risky. A charity, philanthropies didn't want to necessarily support it because it wasn't so popular. And, that radically shifted. And our program and lots of other programs benefited from that shift. And that is a result of people like Ava, 13th, the new Jim Crow, the work that Shaun is doing, bringing this to audiences. And so really, I think it's people like me, it's our job to amplify that, to push that in spaces where it might not have otherwise been heard.
Well, we appreciate the work that you're doing. I think that we all know the optics of people and how others are receptive to them. It matters, right? Especially when you're trying to share a message or get a point across. And we certainly appreciate all the work that you're doing. Thank you so much. I want to introduce a special guest now, Arlene Adams. She is going to join the conversation. Arlene is a longtime member of Children of Promise NYC. She found out about Children of Promise while she was on Rikers Island, and her mother enrolled her 2 daughters into the program where they participated for about 8 years. So Arlene has become a huge advocate of the parents and families within the organization. I know that she's considered a success story. So Arlene, presently some of the highest infection rates of COVID are inside of correctional facilities. Those closest to the problem are also often the closest to the solution. And through your past and present experiences as a parent and as an advocate who was formerly incarcerated, I'm curious if you can share your thoughts on what you feel the biggest challenges might be for children and parents who are incarcerated during this time.
Okay, well, let me just start by being honest. Incarceration is considered to be rehabilitation. But being a formerly incarcerated person, I know that not to be the case always. But at this moment in time with COVID-19, I definitely believe that is really, like retributive justice going on. Everybody is just suffering. There are people in there for lower or lesser crimes that are not afforded the opportunity to go to court. I know a couple of people personally who would have been released maybe 2 months ago. And they are just sitting there and just waiting, for their next available court date. And who knows when that will be. And as far as, the whole disruption of communication is automatically halted. Let me just be real with that. So now being a a prisoner, you know, you get afforded some visits, you get afforded the opportunity to fellowship with other inmates, and, you know, the opportunity to seek services, whether it's for religious, whether it's for educational. All of that has stopped, you know, and I think that is like the biggest thing right now for these inmates. Where's the hope? You know, we're not even talking about the families yet. We're talking about the inmates. Where's the hope for these inmates? So I know personally for myself, I looked forward to every ACS visit I got because I only was able to see my children twice a month. So every visit I looked forward to. And just the minor thought of sitting there without seeing my children for as long as some of these parents aren't able to see my children is very heartbreaking. So then, you know, that just brings in the whole mental health challenges. You're already suffering just being behind those walls. You know, of course, everyone is not in solitary confinement, but now they are. You know, solitary confinement, you're in your cell for 23 hours a day. You get an hour to come out and, you know, hopefully take a shower. And just the thought of that being the case for everyone that's in there. And, you know, solitary confinement is used as, you know, a punishment tool. So now everyone is being punished for, you know, for reasons unbeknownst to them, but because of COVID. So now, even in terms of like things such as parenting classes, that is not afforded to the parents right now. So now when they do get a chance to get home, they're just steps and steps back. It's just a long haul. I believe Dr. Baz was saying, like, you know, it's not just about the incarceration, it's the after effect. It's a whole hurdle to get over. So even with just minor things like receiving certificates, receiving your education, I received my GED in Rikers Island. And if it wasn't for that and being able to get up and do things like that, I would have lost my mind. I stepped into Rikers Island with murder charges, and I was very suicidal. What kept me going was my faith in God, my mother, and my friends, of course, and just the mere fact that I had to make it out for my children. So now a lot of people, they don't have that hope, or they don't have the tool to keep that hope alive. They aren't able to speak to their family on a consistent basis or see their families on a consistent basis. So I believe depression and suicidal tendencies is probably at like the utmost high. Like even just think about Khalif Browder and how he committed suicide after he was released. Now, just imagine being in there, you're already struggling with the fact of, you know, being behind those walls and not being able to see or speak to your loved ones on a consistent basis. You know, I think that's the most heartbreaking thing for me. And even being able to fellowship with your fellow inmates, even things as little as commissary, being able to purchase things like sanitary napkins, very essential to a woman like myself and to many women. Now, I don't know if these women are still afforded those opportunities because of this lockdown situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that, you know, if there's disruption of communication, there's an increased mental health challenges, and just all around, I don't see much rehabilitation happening for these folks right now. And the families, you know, the people that are taking care of the children that are, you know, they don't get to be around their parents as much as it is. Now, the mere fact that you can't even see your parent, you know, hug them, that means a lot to a child. Now, what about the caregivers who have the children? What are they going through right now? What are they telling these children? And then the programs that are there for the children that the children can't even attend right now. I just think, you know, it's just a whole chain reaction, and it's a lot of components. It's a lot of components to this, definitely.
I think that I remember seeing some images from some jails around the country, you know, kind of notes that were posted outside the window saying, "Don't forget about us," and trying to reach out, right? Trying to remind folks. But it seems that always, but certainly now, it seems that in terms of orders of business for politicians and for the people who are trying to put together a plan, that the space that you found yourself in and some of the other folks that are incarcerated right now are the last to be thought about. Would you agree with that?
Most definitely. And not just, us, because I considered myself last when I had to think about my children. They were the most important thing for me. So I think,
how important were those opportunities for you to connect with your kids?
They were detrimental, very detrimental. There'd be times that I could be depressed all week, but I knew I had to find some strength and some hope to get in the shower the next day so I could be prepared for my visit. And, even the visit alone was, to see my children, but it was even a way from, me to interact with my caseworker, because my children were in foster care. So even, the instances where we're able to be, spoken to about our cases, even that's taken away. Even privileges like law library. That was a big thing for me.
Thank you. Sharon, I got another question for you. The recent the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, what message do you think that sends to the youngsters out there?
I give a lot of thought about what our messaging are what messages to our young people, because really there is no message. No one's speaking to our young people. They might be hearing it inadvertently from the message from the mass media, and they may be absolutely seeing the posts that are on social media, but there's no one talking directly to our young people. So how are they taking these messages? How is the impact? And this is the next generation of young people that will be out protesting if we don't really create a message for them now. And I really pose that the message be that I will not stop. I think we really need to pose the message, I will not stop until I make life better for you. There's a momentum going on. And I think we each as an individual have to really commit to our young people. And what are we going to do? What is each one of our parts? What part are we going to play so that the young people do get a message? I mean, the criminal justice system right now has a direct poverty to prison pipeline. We know that in low African-American communities, they're over-policing, over-incarceration, racial discrimination, anti-Blackness. We understand that, right? The criminal justice system does not achieve justice. I actually call it the injustice system at this point. It exacerbates injustice, right? We understand that the United States has the largest prison population of any country. The United States spends $80 billion to incarcerate, predominantly African-American and Latinos. Meanwhile, we're 13% of the US population. So you understand how designated communities are impacted. We understand that in Black communities, poverty, again, is exacerbated in the cash bail. That, as Arlene even mentioned with Khalif Browder, he spent 3 years in Rikers because his mother did not have the bail, which was a couple $100. She couldn't post bail. They end up dropping the charges. He was released, and in 2 years later committed suicide. So poverty has such an impact on the incarceration system. So African Americans and Latinos are left to lavish behind bars, whereas they're not afforded the opportunity, like the 3 officers that were accessories to the murder of George Floyd. They get to sit at home while it's being investigated. For African Americans, you're immediately profiled. The probable cause is instant. We just don't have the same system. So what I propose is that we invest in our communities. We invest in our young people. We have to make sure that not only in saying, okay, we're going to commit to you as a young person, we're going to ensure that we each do our part so that your life is different and that in 5 years or in 5 months, we're not back in the same cycle. We're not protesting against the same situation happening again, the disservice to our Black communities. We have to make sure that we also demonstrate. So we say it, we walk and we talk. We demonstrate that we're committed to education. We demonstrate that we're committed to mental health services. actually creating safety nets for some of our young people that slip through the cracks? How are we creating safety nets for our young people in communities that are so vulnerable? We actually have to say it. I think we have to make sure that our message is direct, but then we're also demonstrating our commitment to our young people.
You've said a couple times now that there's nobody speaking directly to young people out there. Who, in your opinion, who's poised to do that? What is that credible messenger look or sound or do in a way that's able to resonate and to really be that voice?
It has to be an organization that's within the community so that the young people feel the love and dedication. An organization very similar, not only to Children of Promise NYC, where young people have a safe space. They come in. I had a call on Sunday where a young person texted me, he texted me, and he said, Ms. Content, I need someone to talk to. Young people need safe spaces so that they can feel what they express, and they can express what they're feeling. They can ask for need and be able to express what they need. They need to be able to have organizations that are within their community, that they can be able to go in and be able to know that there are people that care for them, and create environments and safe spaces so that they can express what they're feeling, be it anger, be it loss, sadness, despair. What are they feeling? They need to be able to have outlets, because if you don't have an outlet to express what you're feeling, it will manifest in a negative behavior. So we have to be able to create opportunities for our young people to demonstrate and express what they're feeling in safe space. And we have done that at Children of Promise NYC.
Beautiful. Baz, I know you have an opinion on this. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the whole Amy Cooper situation. Her using her privilege to try to wrap that man up in Central Park.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have the same opinion of it.
Really?
Which is it's a classic liberal white woman moment. I mean, it's a scene right out of Get Out. I think the thing that struck me the most about that scenario is her repeated and compulsive use of the term African American when she was making the phone call, because it's so indicative of the fact that she actually thought she was being correct, that she was actually deluded into thinking I can use the trappings of political correctness and somehow my racism won't show through. So I think that's most indicative of the real problem there. I think too, this is another example of white women being the problem, and I'll say it. And I think it's because whereas patriarchy sort of allows white men to be more bold and flagrant in their racism, for white women, I think it doesn't operate quite the same way, and so it's a more nefarious, more veiled, but equally powerful sort of racism that gets displayed.
What? Like, I know that there is a disconnect, right? I know that there is a different life experience when it comes to the relationship between people of color and white people in the police. But they still seem to understand, they still seem to get the fact that like how detrimental or how they've weaponized it, right? Her tone, it seemed like she was waiting for him to react to what she was doing. She knew what she was doing.
And yet she still used the trappings of the correct terminology in there.
She knew what to do. She knew what to do. And you obviously live in New York, which lends itself to this, but this just happens to be your life, a life that is surrounded by Black. You live in your family is Black people in your family. You have felt these kinds of things go on, but most white people don't, right? We know that we are so segregated as a society, right? We don't have those kinds of interactions. So how do we get to some change? How do people grasp what's going on absent of the kinds of experiences that you and people like you have?
Well, I mean, it's conversations like this. And I think, you know, dare I be I mean, generally speaking, I am optimistic, like Shaun, although I think in this moment, my optimism is hard to grasp most of the time. But I think these conversations have to happen. And we need to keep engaging people with this and for white people, unfortunately, sometimes that means safe spaces. But I mean, we just got to keep doing the work. I think it's just about you keep doing the work and they'll catch on sometime in the mix. I mean, to tell you the truth, it's not an agenda item. The agenda is get people to know what's up, period. White, Black, everyone. I think there's a level at which, you know, we're going to spend all this energy getting the Amy Coopers of the world to understand. I don't know. I just don't. But I also do think this, though, Zach, that one of the things that we really have to get people to understand is that it's beyond these individual cases. Americans are always so comfortable talking about individual or not always, but more comfortable talking about individual acts of racism. And they can look at one videotape, or they can look at an Amy Cooper, or they could look at a George Floyd and say, oh my God, that's so horrible. The key is how you translate that into a conversation about systemic racism and, you know, the systems and structures that have built this. And like what I keep saying about the Amy Cooper scenario is, all right, there's the Amy Cooper. But where is Amy Cooper? She's on the Upper West Side, a wealthy enclave of Manhattan. How about we start to understand the systems and structures that created the Upper West Side versus the neighborhood a couple miles away? Right. So that's the key. It's like the discussions need to be grounded in those bigger picture things.
Do you find when you have conversations with your white friends that they understand the severity of that moment, or do they look at it as kind of a bad apple situation?
I mean, to tell you the truth, the white people in my circle are people who do the work. So they didn't need, you know, it doesn't really fit the bill. But I will say this, that I thought, and this, in a way, you're the second person to ask me that, because there is an organization that does some work up in Westchester, speaking of systems and structures and wealth. And they're about basically educating white folks. And they bring in different speakers and so on and so forth. And the woman who heads that organization actually called me today because she said, you know what, for the first time, there are like loads of privileged white people who are already, you know, again, in the well-meaning white liberal scenario, right, wearing their masks and so on and so forth. But for the first time, they called her up en masse to say to her, oh my God, what can we do? So, you know, maybe based on that, this really is impacting a set of folks for whom, you know, who were blind to this sort of thing before.
What do you think is different about this moment? Is it the fires? Is it the kind of the compound nature of the coronavirus and the fact that people are able to be at home, kind of be still and have to take all this in? What is it? You know, I hear a lot of conversations about the amount of destruction that we're seeing across the country, but from a news perspective, and as a journalist who fights so hard to tell these stories, I also know that when the action stops, when the fire stops, the news story is going to pivot. It's going to move, right? And so many of us know that. And so how do we effectively have these conversations and continue them in a way that's productive without some of the other things that are going on that are counterproductive to what we're trying to build in our communities?
So, I mean, that's a big question. I wish I had the answer to it in terms of what's making people pay attention now. My hunch is that it's particularly COVID, because we, you know, in terms of the intensity and the way that people are already in an emotional state and in a state of anxiety to begin with, and compounded with the extra attention to media. But I think that this is where, again, I think we need to not only be doing reactions and Band-Aids, We need to be continuously doing the work and getting people to pay attention to how this was operating, BC before coronavirus, AC after coronavirus. This is a continuous thing, and we have to continue doing the kinds of work. It's all relevant. It's not just about COVID. And get people to recognize the systems and structures that are at play. Get people also to support the organizations that have been doing this work continuously, before the virus, after the virus, during the virus, all of it. And push people in there, use this as an opportunity. I mean, the phrase, the Arundhati Roy phrase that's been thrown around a lot is this pandemic is a portal. So let's use it as a portal. People's minds are open now. Let's pour in some pretty radical ideas around healthcare, around education, around criminal justice, and not only be reacting and pointing to this one particular case, but how do we create a system grounded in restorative justice? How do we create a truly equitable access to education, and access to healthcare, and look at other countries that are doing that in ways that are truly equitable.
Do you think it's just, there's been a lot of conversation about what have we learned? I think I asked Shaun a question similar to that earlier too. Is it a setup for failure to think that, somehow we're going to come, somehow we're just going to pop out of this thing and there's just going to be, a switch that happens and these systems that are so oppressive that somehow they're just going to be dismantled overnight?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to happen. And first of all, and even there's a lot of fantasy thinking, and I think in particular because of this moment, it's a fine line sometimes between optimism and delusion. And some people think the virus is just gonna, go away. And the same is true about these systems and structures. They're not just gonna go away by any means. I mean, I'll be honest, in my book, I write about Rwanda and South Africa, and South Africa is a place I've spent a lot of time and worked in its systems. I think there's sort of examples that things have to radically fall apart and be burned to the ground in order to truly start anew in any sort of a way. It's very, very difficult to fix. It's far more, unfortunately, it becomes far more efficient to radically start anew. And I think we have to think about what that looks like and what that means.
Well, there's certainly, you mentioned South Africa, definitely, an example of that kind of change. And kind of the ingredients to do it. Sharon, I know that you're working on some strategies and initiatives there to help elevate the voices of children and youth out there. What are some of the things that you're working on?
Well, I mean, that actually is why we put this panel together, and it's really motivated us to join here together and have a conversation. And we recognize, to honor the 100+ Americans that died as a result of COVID, disproportionately in African-American communities, and to honor George Floyd and Michael Brown, Sandra Bland, and so many others that have lost their lives at the hands of white officers and have been laid to rest, forgotten, and voiceless. We really need to focus on a number of things. One, decarcerate America. I was having dinner with one of my white colleagues, and I said, could you imagine a community with no fathers, uncles, big brothers, grandfathers? Could you imagine a community trying to thrive without the male figures in the community? So we have to really work together on how do we really strengthen communities and allow them to flourish, and bringing back the men back into the community. How do we, as individuals, we really need to look at the laws and policies that are being put in place by elected officials. I want to name two: the 1980 war on drugs. I go into prisons frequently and meet men who have done 25 years for nonviolent crimes, selling crack cocaine. 25 years. I've met several. And these could be positive members of society. They want to come home and contribute to not only their families, but to the community. They ask me repeatedly, Sharon, what can we do from behind prison walls to make an impact into the community? And I tell them repeatedly, your experience has value. And I connect them with our young people because they do have value. So we really need to be aware. In 1994, Clinton passed the crime bill. That put an entire generation of African Americans into prison. Yes, Hillary did apologize while she was campaigning about that particular law. But again, these men are in prison. So we need to be conscious of what elected officials are actually putting in place that are affecting our most vulnerable communities. So what we're doing at Children of Promise is we service young people between the age of 6 and 13. We have a teen program from 14 to 18. We are an after-school program that co-locates with a mental health clinic. So we're able to provide mental health services to our young people. But what we've focused and dedicated ourselves to doing is really educating our young people on the political process, allowing them to exercise their political power. And that's first coming because, civic classes doesn't exist. Our young people don't understand the American government and how it works and the policies that are put in place to affect their communities specifically in a negative way. So we're actually allowing our young people to learn about the system, learn about the census. What does it mean to complete the census, to be counted, where you live, who you are, to actually elect local elections. It's not every 4 years. Our young people have to learn about the local elections and being able to vote in individuals that look like them and care about their communities. Finding out, as Shaun had even said, for your attorney general, judges, your senators, we have to allow our young people to learn the process so that they can feel they have a voice. It's the despair that has our young people out doing things that they feel they have no choice. As I even explained to my daughter, she had a situation and I had explained to her, she had got into a disagreement. And I said, you know what, when you hurt someone, you can't dictate how they respond. You have to understand if you've caused pain, as America has caused pain on the Black community, they have to understand that is the ramifications. If you inflict the pain, you're not in a position to question or judge why they are responding in that way. And I had to actually explain that to my daughter, and it's very similar. So with that being said, we have to allow our young people to have, as I said, safe spaces to be able to express themselves, be able to learn about different opportunities, writing letters to local politicians, sending emails, being able to know that you do have a voice, you do have a value, and how do you exercise that? And that's what we're doing right now at Children of Promise. Because as Frederick Douglass has said, he said, it's easier to build children than to repair broken men. And we have to keep that in mind as we provide services and speak to our young people.
Thank you for that. We're going to go to kind of a Q&A portion of this now. There's some folks that are part of this conversation that are sending in questions. So I'm going to pose this to both you guys. I think that Shaun had to dip out to take care of some business. So okay. The first question is from an anonymous attendee. So here's the question. I'm so appreciative of this discussion and the macro information that's being discussed. As a social worker who works with young children in neighborhoods which are in crisis, always and especially now, I'm wondering if there's any specific resources, language, support that can be used now to support these children and families. Sharon, I can start with you.
Sure. The resources are there. I can't emphasize enough in everyone, those that are listening to this discussion this afternoon, those that will listen to it after this afternoon, in that we each play a part in how we can work towards supporting young people. And for some, it might be protesting. For some, it might be volunteering your time, identifying an agency within your community where the mission speaks to you. And you're able to say, okay, I'm going to connect with that organization and I'm going to support them. And it might be with resources. It might be with your time, your skills, your efforts and your energies. We need as a people to identify how we can support the communities that are being forgotten and that are really feeling the ramifications of COVID-19, of not being able to be employed for 3 months. I'm sure that, of course, that it's affecting the United States across the board, but you have to also think of the communities in which how we can play a part to make a difference.
Baz, I have the same question for you, and it's a question that I often ask myself, like, how can I best contribute, right? The need is so great. What role can I play in affecting some positive change? It seems like you've been pretty clear on that, but I'm curious, what's your approach to this question, and in that constant kind of conversation that you probably have with yourself?
Yeah, well, I think, so to the specific question about the person who's a social worker, I think, of course, what Sharon said, 100% true. I think one other thing is to think about organizations, reentry organizations, and the people who are a part of them as resources. So many people coming home from prison want to work with young people and impact in positive ways, and play the role. And often many of them had, as we've been talking about, parenthood stolen from them, and so want to do it in other contexts, because of all the years away from their own children and strained relationships that are a result of mass incarceration. So I think that tap into the reentry organizations for a pool of people who really want to be mentors and be credible messengers and get involved, and kind of don't necessarily know how to do that. So I think that's a question that I get asked in terms of what can I do, the I being a general I. Is a question that I think people who do this work get asked most of all. So some of it, and it sort of depends what your context is, right? Some of it is to educate others. Everybody's role is to speak out and be fearless in speaking out. Correct people when they use wrong language, for instance, like calling people inmates or ex-cons, just to not be afraid, even in casual conversation, to say that's not appropriate. And I think this is especially comes back to the, how to reach white folks question, to not be afraid to make people uncomfortable and to be, I guess, politely rude, so to speak. You can be cordially rude and educate people the same way that a white person would a politically correct, quote, white person would know that the N-word is inappropriate. They should know that using the I-word, inmate, right, is inappropriate as well. I think the other things that people can do are hiring practices. If you have a business or someone who has a business and is hiring, be in touch with organizations around hiring, who have a pool of people coming home back to the community, returning citizens, and help get them hired, get people jobs. I mean, every time that I ever have a mic, I say, please, anyone have any jobs? Some of my students are looking for work. So thinking about those kinds of things. And then, of course, there's always the donation situation. There's so many organizations right now, Just Leadership, I think about Just Leadership USA, and especially the Bail Project, who are, bailing people out. There's a lot of bail funds, and a lot of bail funds that are not just doing bail work in the immediate here and now in terms of, again, getting people out, but advocating for more just policies in this respect around things like bail, around things like parole and parole reform and parole violations. I mean, it hasn't really been brought up, so it's worth mentioning how many people in our system are cycled in and out because of minor parole violations. And the first person to die on Rikers Island of COVID was on a minor parole violation. So, and parole officers, by the way, are still getting paid their checks now and making home visits to the people that they're patrolling, even in the midst of this epidemic. Like, it's worth keeping all of that in mind. But even a couple dollars goes a long way in terms for many of these organizations who are doing the work on the ground.
I just want to follow up on what you said. Is part of how do you change a system that is so predicated on capitalism and is fueled by by money, right? You talked about the money for the folks that are trying to do the work to fix it, but it's the system and the money that generates is one of the things that makes it so powerful.
Yeah, you asked the $1 million question, you used the $1 million word, right? Capitalism. And the big question, and unfortunately, I think it's a rhetorical question, is can there be justice under capitalism? And I, to be honest, I believe we can move closer towards it, but no, we can't. We cannot achieve it. And so therefore the undoing, to be a prison abolitionist is not to just not believe in prisons. It's to believe in radically other systems and structures that don't produce the need for prisons in the first place. And so again, getting back to that first question, that poll question, where is racism most displayed? Well, it's in all of these structures and systems. And so we have to think radically about undoing capitalism and what that looks like. I don't think there can be real justice under capitalism.
Another question for Sharon here, from one of the folks that's a part of our conversation here, kind of a two-parter. And we touched on the first part, but remind us again some of the work that Children of Promise is doing in Brooklyn in response to COVID. And then what can people do to support?
Well, as I said, there's a number of things you can do, because there are a number of agencies that are really working towards supporting families and communities as a result of COVID-19. And we can identify one. Everyone can identify an organization that they might be close to home, might be one that's convenient, one that's within their community. But if we have to connect with an organization and then support that organization in the means and the manner in which you can. For Children of Promise NYC, as I said, we have totally pivoted and provided services. Providing virtual after school so that our young people can remain connected with the direct service counselors. Our mental health clinic has continued to provide services. We've also seen an increase in our family counseling sessions, because now we can provide services and mom doesn't have to miss work, travel, be able to much more convenient. So we've been able to have family counseling virtually. So we full-scale mental health clinic. As I said, we're also feeding. We've increased our food program threefold, in that we not only are we providing food to the participants and the members of our organization, but we also provide food to our community. So we have, when I go outside and I see a line that's down the block, but I understand the food scarcity that exists in our community. So we are feeding our families. We're delivering food to families. When grandmothers are raising their grandchildren and they can't come out to the program, we deliver food to them. If there's someone that's ill as a result of COVID-19, someone that has a death in the family as a result, we're bringing food to them. We are providing letters. We have volunteers that come in that are writing letters to our children to keep that connection, because we understand the importance of that interaction, that love and that connection that our young people, if you're not able to get it home, that you're thriving and you receive it through your community. So we understand the importance of that. So we've tried to maintain. We've given out, I want to say, approximately 50 laptops to our families where the school was not able to provide a laptop to our children. So we've been able, from donations as well as from some corporations that provided us with laptops, we've distributed laptops to our family because they were receiving remote learning from their cell phones or from mom's cell phone and sharing a cell phone. So we have provided laptops to our families. We've provided supplies because, okay, now you're having remote learning. Do you have pencils and paper and folder and tape? You don't have the supplies at home. So we've redistributed book bags full of supplies that we usually distribute in September. We've had to redistribute book bags so that our families can have the supplies that are necessary. We've had to provide printers and ink for some of our families. The caregivers' moms want to be able to support their children, but they need to print the documents out so that they can actually help them with the homework and assignments. So we've been able to purchase some printers and ink to provide to some of our families. So we've really pivoted and recognized what were the needs of our family and our community, and then been able to step into place so that we can meet those needs, because we understand how disproportionately COVID-19 impact our community in Bedford-Stuyvesant?
I'm going to go to another question, and then I'm going to pose this to both of you. So here it is. I am a white teacher in a predominantly Black and Latino community. I struggle discussing racism in the classroom, but I work hard to do it, and so does my staff. I find pushback from students sometimes, and they feel they're not affected. They're not affected by racism, which is interesting. They also take on the perspective that we always have this, or we always talk about this kind of stance. So she's asking, I just want to find the right way to not overload, but to do it in the right way. Can I start with you, Baz?
Sure. So it's interesting. I mean, as a teacher myself, I've taught in a variety of contexts. I've taught in prisons for the past 10 years, in a college classroom in a prison, at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, which is CUNY, an incredibly diverse institution. When I was in graduate school, I was at Columbia, and that was very unusual for me, teaching in that kind of an elite setting that was predominantly white. And in all of those settings, I've encountered that kind of, with very different kinds of contexts, I've encountered that kind of attitude of, no, racism, is not an issue, and why so much on race? And I teach a lot of, in prison, in the prison to college pipeline, my freshman year writing class, which I always taught, the theme was reading and writing, race and identity. And all of the classes that I teach in all of these settings are in one way or another very focused on race and issues of race in America and the world. And so I've heard a lot of that resistance. And I think there's no such thing as overload, in my opinion. This is reality. We have to talk about it. You don't have to, by you being the student, you don't have to agree with me all the time. You're not supposed to agree with me all the time. This is education, but you have to engage on this topic. This is a hugely, it's not avoidable. And I think the one thing to keep in mind is that even if you're experiencing resistance now, you don't know what seeds you've planted for later. And I think that's so important. Also, getting back to that question of, how you get white folks to understand. The seed planting goes a long way. I've had so many instances where a student who was really resistant to this, to thinking about race, and especially in my time as a grad student at Columbia, dealing with that population, there was so much resistance. But then years later, they would email me and say, you know what, hey Baz, or hey professor, that I actually saw something that reminded me of you, and you know what, you kind of had a point. People are not gonna, it's like paradigms run deep. They're not just gonna overnight be like, oh my God, you're right, white supremacy is real and it's the foundation of this country. It takes a minute. And so you got to think of it as planting seeds, but you have to do it continuously, and you have to do it boldly, and you have to not be afraid of overload in that respect, as long as you're doing it in an informed, intelligent way. I should say also that when it comes to issues of mass incarceration, we're my organization, the Incarceration Nations Network, we're working on a series of short documentaries, short pieces that are like tools that actually connect the dots around these issues globally and show you how, the crisis looks similarly in so many places of the world. And we're going to have like toolkits for educators that go with them so they can be useful in classrooms and all kinds of other settings. There are other kinds of things like that exist.
Sharon?
Working with young people, resistance comes. It's part of the territory. Children don't walk in and say, oh, great, Ms. Content, what are you teaching us today? No, it comes with resistance. That's part of the game. But that's where the responsibility is on us. Because once we're consistent and young people realize that it's not a job and you're really committed to their development and you're committed to them, that's where the resistance, that's where they'll lose the resistance. That's where the trust will begin. But it really comes from your consistency, your dedication to young people. And then that's where our young people start to learn. And they have to be able to learn in different ways. It's not always, okay, what I say and here's the assignment. It's really finding very creative ways. At Children of Promise, we've really used technology to tap into our young people. We recognize that that is the way that most relates to our young people, and it is the way for us to really be more efficient and effective with our resources. So we've really tapped into technology in being able to work with our young people. But I definitely believe it comes from the commitment and the dedication that you have that allows young people to trust and open up to what you have to say.
Thank you so much. I think we're gonna wrap up the conversation now, and I just wanted to. I was curious if you had any closing remarks, Sharon.
I mean, first, I want to thank everybody for your time, for listening, and really, I'm hoping the takeaways from this evening is that everyone just understands that you do play a part. You do play a role in what happens in America today, not only in your community, but communities that they may look very different in your community. You know, they may be across the bridge, they may be down the way, but you know what? You can play a part, not only in understanding, again, going back to your local elected officials, but also just caring enough to say, okay, what can I do? What's my part? And if we all just accept the responsibility in what that may be, how small or how vast that may be, but in just playing your part to make a difference in communities that are really forgotten, silent, and just unacknowledged. You know, we really just need to if we could just accept that, I think that would really play a part.
Yeah, I love it. I want to thank you, Sharon, first of all, for hooking me up and inviting me to be a part of the conversation. I admire the work that you do so much.
Thank you.
You know, having an opportunity to come over and see the space that you've created, not only to have these conversations, but to help these youngsters heal and to get the support they need means everything to the community. And again, whatever I can do to support you, I'm always here. And Baz, to your work as well. I know it's been a while since we connected, but you know, I see the work that you're doing from afar, and it's so important. It's so important that we continue these conversations, the three of us, Shaun as well, and of course everybody else who took time out of their day to be a part of this. You saw the need, or you saw the value to be here, and so. I think that we're all in this together, and we're all trying to find the right ways and the most impactful ways to make a difference. And I think that so much is about intention. And as long as that we all stay intentional about this work and stay committed to it and lean on each other, I'm doing my best to be optimistic. So thank you all for being
Excellent.
part of it. Yeah.
If I can just say that's a quick thank you. Thank you so much, Jerry, for hosting and facilitating this dialogue. Baz, thank you. Shaun, I'll give him a call after this, after we hang up, and thank him again personally as well. But I just want to also thank some of the members who are listening from the nonprofit sector that are really trying to make real and equitable change. I've worked with them not only as a part of the Mayor's Commission, but I really want to thank the nonprofit agencies that are listening, the staff of Children of Promise NYC that are really committed to the commitment to the families and to the young people, the incarcerated parents that I know will be calling and continue to call us and remain engaged, the Bedford-Stuyvesant and South Bronx community. I want to thank you for your continued support. And just on a personal level, I want to thank Jack and Jill of Bergen-Passaic County. I want to thank the Bronx chapter as well as the Brooklyn chapter, who the women in this organization has not only dedicated their time, but the resources to support Children of Promise NYC. And my personal girlfriends that have committed to this organization have committed to me when this was just an idea, a thought. 10 years ago, I'm actually back down in my basement now. When I started the organization 10 years, I can't believe I'm back down, but as a result of COVID, here I am. But I want to thank them when this was just a dream, a vision, a goal, and just supporting us, and absolutely to my family when I'm not there, when I'm needed, and just for stepping in and really helping me with my daughters and my family. So I thank everyone for your time this afternoon. Thank you.
Beautiful. Peace.